everyone, and welcome back to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today we have yet another PPC candidate with us, Mr. Richard Farbridge. How are you doing, sir?
Pretty good. Good morning, Payman.
Good morning, Richard. It's good to finally meet you. I think we've had a couple of phone conversations. Why don't we start with getting a little background information on who you are, where your riding is, and I don't know what your experiences have been in Canada growing up.
Okay. I live in Burnaby, British Columbia, and I've been here just about 20 years. Raised my family here. I'm still raising my family. I have three boys, and I'm in the riding where Jagmeet Singh is our member of parliament, and I'm a designated candidate, but we haven't completed the process to confirm if it will be in my home riding or the adjacent Burnaby, North Vancouver riding. I'm 60 years old. I'm a civil engineer, and I do have previous political experience. Going back a few decades, I ran for the Reform Party of Canada. It's not a career aspiration of mine. I did it back then because I thought there was a need, and again, there's a need, much stronger need now, I think, for fresh representation. So that's what brought me here and got me involved with the People's Party, and I liked what I've seen so far, and I'd like to participate, take that further.
So the one question, I never ask any easy questions of PPC candidates. So I guess the first question I would ask is why did you decide to run for the PPC as opposed to running for the Conservative Party, which is a more established party and has more of a brand recognition?
Well, established parties, in my opinion, are a big part of the problem. People use terms like the uniparty, not just in Canada, in the US and other places. They seem to have evolved into status quo. And there's a big problem with the status quo that you could go on about, I think, literally forever. But when I've listened to Maxime Bernier online and been to see him speak in person, I've been quite impressed with his no nonsense, honest and open, platforms and attitudes. The thing that he said in person that really caught my attention was that, we have a policy, and part of that policy is open debate, regardless of whether we agree with someone or not. The traditional parties, the big three in Canada, they tend to operate on polls. They do a poll, they find out what's popular, and that becomes their policy of the day, which is what got us into the current political climate that we're in. So I see this as a great alternative to that.
You mentioned you have a family, three sons. Can you tell me the last few years under the pandemic, how has that impacted your family's happiness? Did it not impact them at all? Did it adversely impact them? And how did that influence your decision to run?
It impacted them severely. It was sickening to see what it did to children, especially my children. We chose not to be vaccinated. As an engineer that reviews a lot of technical proposals, when I saw the complete lack of safety information on the vaccine, my personal decision was no, I'll sit this out, or I'll wait it out for a bit. And that resulted us literally being ostracized from society, and that's hard as an adult, but for children, it was unacceptable. Couldn't go to movie theaters or restaurants, couldn't eat in the cafeteria if we wanted to go skiing. Trying to explain it to them. Right now, their ages range from 14 to 20, so we were dealing with 10 to 16-year-olds, and it broke my heart that the situation they were in. You know, this was on top of COVID, the fear of COVID, and schooling online, and being confined to the house, and then being ostracized as well, while the rest of the world's talking about us all being in it together. That was rather ironic. We weathered it well. It's been a great learning experience for them. And rather than waiting out on the vaccine, I basically confirmed what were my worst fears, that this thing is experimental and has severe side effects for a lot of people. But it's not about the vaccine for me. It's about how politics and society dealt with it. And it seems to be the new way of administration, public administration. That's really what's got me concerned. There's no debate on things. Things are very divisive on so many topics. There needs to be an alternate perspective presented in the House of Commons.
So I want to come back to that issue of there being no debate and there's just no professionalism in the Commons. I'm presuming you were born in Canada, correct?
Yeah, actually, ironically, my wife, myself, and all our boys were born at a hospital, which is pretty unusual. And we just lived down the road from it now. I grew up in Coquitlam, but when I started to raise my family, I came here.
That's an interesting turn of events, or interesting coincidence. But the reason I ask is I was doing the math in my head, and I'm horrible with this. You mentioned you're 60, so you were born somewhere in the 1960s, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And I'm assuming you don't remember Diefenbaker, but perhaps you remember Pierre Elliott Trudeau.
Yes, Diefenbaker was not anything I was paying attention to at my age, but definitely Trudeau. You know, being a very not just a politician, but a very public personality. I don't think at any age you could have missed that.
So my question, it kind of leads to this erosion that's happening in the Commons, but there's no debate. How have you witnessed Canada change? Like the people, the culture, the mindset of Canadians. How has it changed since, let's say, the 70s?
Well, somebody's flipped over the table completely. I mean, the things that people admired about Canada and the things that we were proud of, uh, I don't recognize it. You know, Canada was generally, whether you're a conservative or liberal, was generally a social country, left of center. I mean, if you compare all of our politics to our neighbors to the south, they would probably consider us all liberal. I'm not sure how things changed so quickly. The divisiveness on so many topics seems to be created by government, not managed by government. Got to question why that is. We really need to be united as people, and we can debate issues that we have differences on once we return that state.
Do you think like was there a turning point? It's like do you think things changed after Pierre Elliott Trudeau? Was it after Mulroney and leaning into immigration? Or was it just gradual? Because like I remember, I've been here since '89, and I remember Chrétien was to me was like kind of an okay prime minister. What are your views?
Chrétien, you know, I didn't dislike what he did. I thought he was a parade leader, right? He's, you know, I don't want to go tooting the horn of what would be the opposition, but I remember when 9/11 happened or 9/11, and the whole world had one opinion, and he was obviously supportive of what the rest of the world's opinion was, but at the same time he questioned. He said you have to stop and ask yourself why this happened. Why would people do something like this? And he made a statement that I'll never forget. And I still really can't put my finger on why it hit home. But he says when you live by a greed that knows no limits, you get blowback. And it was like, okay, it's not condoning what happened, but it was a very wise thing to say, and he was kind of condemned for it. But I think the rest of what he did, nothing really got my attention. It was just, he was kind of a fence sitter.
We're gonna go south of the border now that you mentioned 9/11. Uh, what were your views towards the Iraq War back then? It's so far back, it doesn't matter what your views were. And what are they now in light of, the Patriot Act and how it's kind of spiraling out of control?
I think the Patriot Act was a big change in freedoms that ultimately spread internationally and affected the whole world. The emotion that drove it was a correct emotion, but probably that shouldn't have been what was driving things. I think people gave up their freedoms to governments that maybe weren't the best caretakers of it. At the time, I didn't think Iraq was the driver. I didn't understand why they were going into Iraq based on 9/11, and that proved to be correct. But it was quite a shock at the time. I was working on a construction project, a power plant down in Texas when it happened. Uh, so I think that added a little more emotion. Being amongst Americans, everybody seemed to know somebody that was in New York at the time. But it was a catalyst. I guess it was a catalyst, and it was one of the big changes that may or may not have led to the massive changes and shift that we're seeing now.
What about bringing it back to what's happening right now in Ukraine? Like somebody asked me for my opinion on, I think PPC platform, it says that we do not support sending foreign aid unless under specific circumstances. And they were asking me, like, what are the specific circumstances? So what's your view on foreign aid?
My view on foreign aid is most of my lifetime, Canada has been very generous with needy foreign issues, and I've been quite proud of it. And even with our high taxes, happy to contribute to it. But something's gone off the rails. Number one, before COVID, our debt was potentially unmanageable. And not only did we double it, but we're throwing out massive sums of foreign aid with little debate or supervision. It's being piled on a debt that I think now is unmanageable, without question. What we do there is it's like eating your seed corn to get through the next winter. If we want to continue to provide valuable foreign aid where it's needed, we best not bankrupt ourselves, or we'll be unable to do that. And there's a time when you need to pull back and certainly scrutinize more what your choices are for foreign aid.
Speaking of debt, kind of tangentially related, the housing crisis. Um, I nowadays all I do is walk around and try to figure out talking to myself, what's going on with housing and what caused it. What are your thoughts on what caused the housing crisis?
Well, I mean, it's local and it's international, right? And now it's even in the small towns and the places that used to be cheap. But Canada seems to have, done very well at destroying housing opportunities for Canadians, as compared to other countries, especially in Toronto and Vancouver. Treating it like a commodity has pushed things up, driving interest rates down to unsustainably low rates to juice the market. Has done the same thing, right? You can't have good times and party all the time, right, without consequences. And I experienced it myself. We had a condo here in Vancouver, but when I went to work, we were in Oregon, in Texas. I worked in Nevada, the Virgin Islands, and But the most recent time to start a family, when we came back to Vancouver, detached house was unaffordable for us. It was just in Vancouver. The rest of the country was pretty much affordable, and it's just gotten worse and worse. And I often said to people, what we've done is we've created this great windfall for homeowners, and it's to the detriment of all future generations of potential homeowners. Like, and people they're celebrating it. I didn't get it, but here we are, right?
You mentioned that home ownership it's being treated like I think you used the word commodity. Can you go into more detail about that?
I remember, when we used to read more printed news, and one of the biggest sections of the weekend newspaper was real estate, right? Not news, it was real estate, and it was all pumping this great market. Things only go up, and everybody's coming here, and you can't lose. And well, it went on for longer than anyone could have reasonably forecasted, right? And even now they say, oh, it's still going up, but the reality is it's not going up as much as the inflation rate. So common sense says that you run that formula and it's actually going down. It's just ignoring inflation. So I think the party is stalled. What'll happen next? Who knows? Because it's such a heavy manipulated thing. But people do need homes. You take that away, you're taking away a lot of the hope and joy in life, the independence and the pride. And we're in a terrible spot for future generations. And this might have something to do with the divisiveness. When young people see that they can't afford a home and that there's this massive debt that they're expected to pay off, you get unpredictable political outcomes, right? There's depression, there's anger, there's all kinds of emotions, but it can lead to, political upheaval, and not necessarily good, right? Something's got to happen. Something's got to give for sure. I understand why people are all for various types of change, and it certainly contributes to all the divisiveness that's going on too, because so many people feel like they don't have a stake anymore.
Here in our province of BC, I'm going to trivialize this, but essentially the BC NDP has run healthcare into the ground, and they're bankrupting the province. For example, I think this year they're giving $235 million to the BC Nurses Union. They're making some argument that they're trying to have ratios, but you don't need to go through the unions to enact political change. And then having done that, they're now turning around and they're essentially nationalizing housing. So with the new land reform acts and the minimum zoning requirements, I feel like they're causing a problem and people get angry and they're causing another problem to address that anger. And if we don't break that cycle, it's just going to get worse and worse. What do you think about that theory?
I think, yeah, it's very misguided. It's very reactionary with regard to polls and popularity, and it's potentially even more destructive than what we've done in the past. It's probably well-meaning. I mentioned before that Canadians are generally not anti-socialist. They're a middle ground. A reasonable middle ground has been our history, and we've done all kinds of, we call them social experiments, but like in business, especially in big business, we often declare our solutions to be correct before we've even implemented them, and we don't monitor the results and learn which social experiments are working and which aren't, because God forbid you should say this one didn't work and then it's used against you in the next election, right? But what good is it if you don't learn from it? And if it's a disaster, the only way the disaster ends is to vote out the government. We just switch governments every 4 years. Again, this is where open debate with your opposition on issues brings value to everybody.
When you say that, we both kind of agreed on this, but I want to understand what your understanding of this. When you said there's no debate, do you mean like they literally shut down the debate, or do you mean that like that Parliament's turning into a zoo?
It's at all levels, right? In Parliament, we had people working from home, so when someone would get up and speak, if they're in the House, they're speaking to an empty House. Yeah, things are rushed through and shut down for sure. Bills that are proposed have such volume that no one really could read them in time, let alone understand them like they should. But that's just in Parliament. What concerns me more is there's no debate in public anymore. If you don't agree with me, I won't talk to you. I'll other you. I'll unfriend you, right? I'll say, but it's just, they've fostered a divisiveness that is sickening. People don't want to talk about issues in public, even with people that are interested in those issues, because you will, and God forbid, you post it online or something. I should make a list of the way they've divided us. There's race and gender and socioeconomic status, and there's opinions on issues like wars. It used to be that Canadians, were against wars, any war, and we protest and question and dive into the issues. And now it's just pick a side and hate the other side. That hasn't worked historically. That's made them worse. Honestly, I don't get it. So yeah, I think the one-to-one on the public, you can't blame it all on the politicians. People need to engage.
How do you think we? Sorry,
Instead censor speak of financial and criminal penalties for saying what's on your mind.
How do you think we break through that? How do you get people to stop being so polarized?
Well, it took quite a while to get there, and it won't end overnight unless there's a sudden disgust with the result. I suppose it could come to an end overnight, but a lot of the way we do things has been geared to support this. The emotional thing of kicking out a government is a start. It's not a solution. A lot of people say it's a solution, but it's a start. And then, whoever replaces them has to keep in mind not to evolve into the same thing. You need all the sides discussing things, and if you can set an example in government, that'll help publicly, right? But people are pretty divided and isolated. COVID certainly made that easy for them to do. It probably would have done it on its own to some extent because of the isolation. But you need to work at it and not just watch it on TV. People need to work at opening up to each other and starting to discuss what needs to be done.
Going back to one thing you said previously, that these bills, they're just too long. I'm reminded as a quote, I think it was from Hamilton. He said, when laws become so lengthy that ordinary people can't understand them, they cease to be laws. So, like, assuming you get in on what can you as a candidate, or what can we do to reverse this trend of these massive, like, lengthy acts?
Well, I mean, if we get in, we're a young party, right? So the definition of get in is, I think growth is what we're hoping for, and some seats and a voice. And I think a voice that is not controlled by polls has more freedom. And if we can speak with good common sense and without divisiveness and throw in some good ideas, we can steer things. We can lead by example, and we can have a very positive effect and continue to grow. And even just in lead ups to elections and during elections, we can also have that kind of influence. Even in ridings where there's little support. So I think I'm encouraged by it. But what the world needs right now is to step back from the precipice. So to throw out these governments in many countries around the world that have brought us there, I think is the first step. And people have to do that. You can't wait for someone to step in and fix the world for you. People have to decide to make that change.
I like where you're going with that. The way the characterization you made of the PPC as a young party, we want to voice and we want to debate.
Yeah, it goes a long way. I mean, if you listen to Maxime Bernier when he speaks, I'm not one to be like an idol worshiper, but I've been very impressed. He speaks from the heart and he thinks on his feet, and he makes a lot of sense. I don't see him as divisive like the media portrays him, but I mean, they're paid to portray all opponents of the powers that be that way. But when you see him or hear him, it's not the takeaway. It's just the way they're trying to portray him and the party.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. Richard, I talked to some people and there's this differing opinions. Some people say that political change can come through politics, like a top down. Other people are more pessimistic and they say politics is almost irrelevant now. It's the institutions. By institutions, they mean, education, unions, permanent bureaucracy. What's your view on that?
Yes, that's always been the case, but it's been more behind a curtain. And I think on a lot of examples, that curtain has been pulled back. So many people have seen that, and for what it is, many people don't want to see it. It messes with their worldview too much to wrap their heads around, right? They're busy with their lives. Often they're overwhelmed with their lives. And to think there's this shadow, I guess like a shadow government, it's mind-boggling. But I believe it is the case. In the past, politicians worked with that, and it slowed down change, but it didn't prevent it. But when the shadow governments want to affect massive and sudden change, that's a big problem, depending on what kind of change is coming. But I see restrictions in freedom of speech, freedom of movement, right? Access to resources, some that you need to move around, some that, like food supply that you need to survive. Massive sudden changes, and they literally put millions and millions of lives at risk worldwide. And we're running towards the cliff as if, it's always been okay and therefore it will continue to be okay. I don't think so. I think we need to act on this.
I wanted to talk about the convoy and the truckers. I try to stay away from that because it's very polarizing. I supported them during the convoy. What was your view? I mean, like, what Freeland did in freezing bank accounts, like, how do you view that?
Well, it was totalitarian. Absolutely. It was stupid as well. How to destabilize your banking system overnight. I also supported the convoy. So my name was on that list that was given to the banks. They only froze the accounts of people that were actively on site, but they were prepared to do more. But the Emergencies Act got suspended. That was extremely stressful for me. it was stressful for my kids too. I was going to go with the convoy when they were starting up, and they left from Annacis Island in Delta, and I had lost my job because I declined the job. I had 17 years as an engineer. They put me on leave without pay, and ultimately, as a manager, they never brought me back. They brought back the unionized people, but as a manager, they decided to make an example, I guess. And I was going to go with the convoy. I thought, I've got time. Why not? This is a worthy cause. And my oldest son talked me out of it because he was scared. He was scared with what's happened in the world and being thousands of kilometers away. And I decided I should stay home as much as I wanted to go and join that. But I'm glad they had the success that they did and the support that they did, and set an example for the world.
Okay, let's stay on this topic. You at the time you were in Burnaby, correct?
Yeah.
I was in West Vancouver. Um, I would say among my friends in West Vancouver and Vancouver, probably 98% despised the truckers. What was your view among your circles in Burnaby?
They thought they were kind of tinfoil hat wearers. And then it turned into despise. When the politicians stood up and said, "You will despise them," then they did. Interesting thing, I've never been in a physical fight in my life, as a lot of adult males haven't. But it came pretty close. I was isolated and put out of work and stressed out, and I went into a coffee shop, which was my ritual to, you know, calm down and enjoy a moment. And some guy sitting next to me was reading the paper, and he commented out loud. He says, "Those damn truckers," he says, "they just need to shoot them all." I said, "I'm one of those truckers. You're going to shoot me?" And it deteriorated from there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it did something to me. It did something to him, right? Did it serve any useful purpose? Of course it didn't. Luckily, the coffee shop owner asked the other man to leave, but it was a really, really difficult time. And then I saw our leaders, Trudeau and Singh, standing up and vilifying people for having that opinion. And my kids saw that too. And for a Canadian leader, to me, that was completely unacceptable, regardless of what side of politics you're on. It's completely unacceptable to actively work to divide people.
I started noticing signals and I started connecting some dots. So as soon as the truckers got to Ottawa, Trudeau went into hiding.
Yeah.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer of um, Michigan, I believe, she came out and she said, you have to put an end to this Windsor border blockade." The Department of Homeland Security released their infamous bulletin about mis, dis, and malinformation. Trudeau comes back out of hiding, and then all of a sudden, you're hearing the word white supremacy thrown around Parliament when it would never been used in Canada. And then from there, you draw a line to they actually bring a literal Nazi in Parliament. And people say that that thing was just a mistake. They, they overlooked his past record. But like, what do you see that led to that Nazi coming into Parliament?
They're not in control of what they say and do, right? I think they believe that they can do no wrong, and they charge into things without thinking it through, and they declare it a success regardless of the outcome, right? I think the fact that that person was Ukrainian was as far as they saw, but nonetheless they did it, and they looked like idiots, and they're running the country. So it's that arrogance and lack of true control and direction that kind of scares me, right? Do you know the lawsuit against the the restrictions on travel, air travel and whatnot, they got into their discovery with federal staff about how that restriction came about. It was supposed to be for the safety of people traveling. And it turns out they didn't consult any doctors or scientists or health officials, none. The person that ran that committee was a political hack for Trudeau. She had a degree, I think it was in English literature, and no one on the panel, on the committee, had any health experience, nor did they consider anything scientific. They just did it because it was wanted. And so the justice system, well, they paused the restrictions, and then the justice system declared it moot, so it could never be properly addressed through the courts. And then the media, they were complicit with their silence, such damning facts. This is how our country's getting run. It's a snapshot of how our country is being run.
In light of the Mosley decision that rendered the use of the Emergency Measures Act unlawful, what are your views on judicial activism? By judicial activism, I mean they're legislating from the bench. They're creating rights where they don't exist. They're just calling things moot, and they're taking judicial notice of things they shouldn't.
To me, it appears completely corrupted. Now, you're supposed to be more polite, but that's what I'm saying. To me, it appears that they're completely corrupted. They know who butters their bread. There seems to be a complete lack of referring to legal precedents, and it's more what's popular today. How did that happen in Canada? Regardless of whether someone challenges things constitutionally or not, how did that happen? And why are people okay with it?
Do you, this one's gonna be a tough question. If you don't have an answer, you can say so. The only reason I have one is because I did an episode with Leighton Gray, a lawyer from Alberta. Do you have any idea of how we can begin reforming the courts as through the legislature?
I think there's a lot of fear out there. And I think the system has people that will do anything, and it also has people that want to do the right thing, but they have to not be canceled or othered or ostracized themselves or have their careers destroyed for doing the right thing. So if you remove the climate of fear or even knock it down a bit, those people will emerge. And the system, it can work. It should work, right? It's slow and it's expensive, but here's what's happening, whether it's the justice system or crown corporations or other services, they're eroding the confidence in institutions, which is what gives the country stability. And it doesn't matter what your issue is. You may have nothing to do with the courts personally, right? You might just be trying to get a passport or travel, but it is eroding the confidence in institutions. And people that make their careers in institutions, so many of them, what it's about is making sure that institution remains viable. And there's been so much damage done. You have to step back and say, it doesn't matter what your political perspective is. This looting and destruction, it's got to stop. It's got to be addressed.
What about like where do you think as a like are you a constitutionalist? Take like the Healthcare Act of Canada, which like how in the Constitution the health is a provincial jurisdiction, but then we got this massive Health Canada bureaucracy. How in your mind do you justify that?
Well, I guess it's got a lot to do with the budget. It's the majority of the taxes that are collected, or maybe not the majority, but the biggest use of our tax money is healthcare. And so Ottawa's, I guess they're like a parade leader on that. They have the ability to influence, pull strings, and there's a time and a place for that. But yeah, it's a provincial thing. It makes you wonder if there's a there's a better way to address it.
I can ask the question in a different way. I'll answer it myself. So take housing. Housing is another provincial jurisdiction, and we're trying to get in with the PPC. Housing is a big polling issue, so we want to go in there with policies to, get voters to vote for us. One way would be to cut down on immigration, reduce the demand. But a
Yeah.
lot of these, like the Conservative Party, they're talking about lowering regulations. And how do you, uh, uh, Richard, how do you not fall into that trap where you look to the polling and you're like, oh, I'll do this and this and this for housing?
It's tough. We've painted ourselves into a corner over a long period of time, and people want to hit the easy button to resolve it. It's not going to be easy. So anyone working to resolve it is going to have opposition. And you don't need much opposition if you're in power to lose your margin of victory, right? Again, open debate. The public needs to be informed about what caused it, what can be done about it, and be in agreement with the path out of it. Because if they're not, they're just going to switch governments every 4 years because they don't like what's happening. A lot of people have gotten very wealthy off their homes. And a lot of people are invested in the fact that that's what's going to happen with their home that they still owe on. So their needs or desires are in direct opposition to people that are younger, right? And we're divided over it. But people need housing, not as a gift, not as a right, but they need housing. And we need to stop treating it like a commodity and look at things that have thrown fuel on that fire. And when you start to move in that direction, you are going to alienate some, and others are going to think it's not happening fast enough. But you do need to move in that direction. We can be effective in the sense that, our three main parties, they just keep doing the same thing, and we wouldn't have as much to lose if we had a handful of seats in Parliament and could speak and propose ideas and encourage debate. We can work towards a resolution without us having to worry about, oh, we're going to lose our power. Well, that's not why we're there. It's power, right? At least not in the near future.
Richard, I was chuckling there at the end. It just occurred to me, the media labels us, the PPC, as the far right extreme party, but we're really, a lot of the times, I feel like we're a labor movement party, like we're helping out the working class and the middle class.
Well, that's where a lot of our support comes from, ironically. They try to label us, and they try and create a fear and division campaign. But we appeal to a lot of people's, I think, their best instincts, regardless of what their political leanings are. And like I said before, I think Canadians have a strong social responsibility, to the point where people in other countries might call us all socialists, but we're not. We're not extreme left, nor are we extreme right. We generally have been somewhere in a well-managed middle, and the current government wants to portray it as something else. I really see a lot of what they're doing as extreme left, but I don't go around throwing that label out there just trying to stoke fears.
Um, I'm not sure how much more time we have, but I have a couple more questions. One is on immigration. Can you tell us what your views are on immigration?
I think immigration is a good thing. We don't have a replacement birth rate happening in Canada. Unless we want a declining population, we have to address that. And that's two ways. For a lot of people, it's economic, housing part of it. For a lot of people, it's lifestyle choice. but we're still operating in a lot of things on the infrastructure we had 30, 40 years ago. And we bring in a lot of people and we're not doing enough with roads and hospitals and infrastructure. As a civil engineer, there's we have some pet projects, but we're not generally renewing our infrastructure at the rate that we're increasing the population. But again, they've turned it into a divisive issue. If you question how well is it managed, you're far right. Again, there goes the debate. It's just division and cancellation of other people's opinions. We all live in neighborhoods with immigrants and work with people who are immigrants. And I think we're a pretty tolerant lot for the most part. You do have outliers. But bringing in, I saw an article just the other day, bringing in people who will work for lower pay, expecting that they're going to be the ones that provide to our unfunded liabilities for pensions and healthcare. Mathematically, that's not working out. And 10 years ago, people that said it wouldn't work out were vilified, and now it's starting to prove true. It doesn't change the fact that we have all these unfunded liabilities. So doubling your immigration doesn't resolve that. You need to look at what works for Canada, and then you need to have a portion of that is just pure refugee issues where people that absolutely need somewhere to go, that we do our part and hopefully set an example of it, but not to our own detriment. Otherwise, we won't have the ability to continue to do that in the future.
I'm going to ask you a question about, this is provincial jurisdiction, but it's an important one: education, public education.
Yeah.
A lot of parents are upset. You have 3 kids. They're upset that the schools are teaching things that they disagree with, that they're concealing these things from them. I guess it's a 2-part question. What are your views on that? And what, if anything, can the federal government do?
It is more of a provincial issue, but you notice it's happening in all the provinces and all the G7 countries. It's driven by something higher. You can speculate on what that is, World Economic Forum, United Nations, but it's driven by something higher. But what I see happening in Canada seems to be not in lockstep with the US, where they've gone overboard on some of that, but it's heading down the same road, and it's changing quickly. So it's a great concern. Parents need to pay attention and speak up.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah. It's a difficult one for anyone to resolve federally. I guess, Richard, we're approaching the end of the show, and normally I give them a few minutes to give a message of optimism and hope. But as you're running as potentially running as a candidate for the PPC, maybe if you could tell the audience how it is that you're going to decide, how you're going to campaign, and what your vision for Canada is.
My biggest concern, my vision for Canada is the restriction of our rights and freedoms. Because once they restrict what you can say in person and online and have severe penalties for it, we've seen with the current government how far they'll take that. It affects everything else. So number one, these people need to be kicked out. Number two, whoever replaces them needs to be encouraged to debate openly. And I think the PPC platform and goals are well suited to that. A lot of this interview is asking me about what I think about this and what I think about that, but it's not about me. So, I mean, I could go on forever. I don't know if anyone would want to listen, but it's not about me, right? But what can I do to help affect change? My kids don't know where to go in life, because everything's uncertain and changing so much. And I know a lot of people's kids are getting depressed. We got to correct that. So I'm doing this for them. I mean, I could go out and look for my next engineering job, or I could focus on this. I think this is much more, much better use of my time.
Well, Mr. Farbridge, thank you very much for coming on the show and telling us a little bit about yourself. And I wish you the best of luck with your campaign. And hopefully we'll get you back on the show.
Thank you. And for the people that are listening, remember, this was my first interview on getting into this. So it may not flow so well, but I hope to smooth things out as far as how I deliver the messages I'd like to get out there.
You
Thank you for
did a fantastic job. Thank you very much.
the opportunity.
Take care.